Let's continue on with what happened next after Paul Revere's ride. Today we're going to find out about the battles of Lexington and Concord. Remember, this is the place Paul Revere was trying to get to. In Concord was where Samuel Adams and John Hancock and other men were meeting to decide what to do next. Let's get started. The first part of the lesson is called The Shot Heard Round the World. The British soldiers now were marching to Lexington, and when they got into the small town of Lexington, they were surrounded by Minutemen. I want you to remember something about the Minutemen, that these were just ordinary men. They were dads and uncles and brothers and young men and grandfathers. They didn't have uniforms. They didn't have military training. They were farmers. They were artists. They were people who worked in grocery stores. They were regular men. So, as the British soldiers got to Lexington, they were surprised by seeing a group of these Minutemen there. And they gathered together to stop them from entering the town. Well, no one knows who did it, but somebody fired a shot. A shot was fired, and that one shot became known as the shot heard round the world. The reason why we say this is because this first shot is really the beginning of the Revolutionary War. We say it was heard round the world because this is the very beginnings of how the greatest country in the world, the United States of America, was formed. This one shot started the United States on its way to being its own country. So, back to that shot. In the Battle of Lexington, 8 Minutemen were killed, 9 were wounded, and only 1 British soldier was wounded. The Minutemen just couldn't stop them there. There wasn't enough of them in Lexington to stop the British from getting on from their trip towards Concord. The British continued marching to capture Samuel Adams and John Hancock and to get our weapons that were hidden there. Here is a picture of this battle. As you can see in the front here, these were the Minutemen, ordinary men that were fighting against the strongest army in the world. The Redcoats were trained, they had weapons, they had horses. Now, the guns that the Minutemen were using were ordinary hunting rifles for the most part. The Redcoats had bayonets that were weapons that not only shot muskets, shot bullets, but it also had a spear on the end of them. Ours were mainly used for hunting. So in Lexington, we were not successful. Ahead in Concord, when the British got there, they went to where they thought all of these weapons were hidden in one large storage area. But when they got there, they couldn't find any of them. Where their weapons were supposed to be, there was not one single weapon in that building. The Patriots, along with help from women and children, had time to get those weapons and hide them. Now, they took them out of that building and they hid them in wheat fields and cornfields, and they hid them in farmers' barns and in kitchens, and they hid them in places where the soldiers weren't going to look for them. The Patriots in Concord were ready this time. That little short battle in Lexington had given them enough time to get all the weapons out of that storage area and to get all of the men prepared for the Redcoats marching to town. Here's what happened. The Patriots met all of the Redcoats at a place called the North Bridge. The North Bridge was the entrance into Concord. There were 400 colonial Minutemen from Concord and the area around there waiting for them, and they had gathered on the high ground across the river. They knew that if the redcoats were coming to town, they would have to cross that north bridge. That was the only way to get there. So the Minutemen, they formed up and they advanced, which means they moved in on the British. The British responded by running away back across the bridge. I think they were really surprised to see how many Minutemen were waiting there in Concord for them. When the British troops opened fire on the Americans, the Minutemen responded with a volley, that means shooting, of their own. They were able to kill 3 British soldiers and wounded 9 more. This really surprised the British. And they looked up and they realized, I don't think we can do this here. And so they began to run back towards Boston. So they turned around and they began to retreat. Here is a drawing of that old North Bridge here, and the redcoats here beginning to turn and run as the Minutemen began to chase them back towards Boston. Now, here's my favorite part of the story. Now, remember that Paul Revere, along with Prescott and Dawes, on their way to warn the people in Concord, they also woke up and they warned all of those families along the road to Lexington and Concord. Remember, they were yelling, the regulars are coming, the regulars are coming. So all of the men in the farms and the houses along the way knew this was happening. And here's what they are going to do. These Americans, these Minutemen, they fired from everywhere at the redcoats that were running back to Boston on the road. Thousands of men and boys that had been alerted by Paul Revere, they had come out of their homes in the middle of the night. They got on horses and they rode to Lexington and Concord. They didn't quite get to that town, but they, along that road, when they saw the redcoats running back towards Boston and coming back on their horses, well, they hid behind big boulders and trees and barns, and they shot at the retreating redcoats as they were running back towards Boston. Along that way from Concord to Boston, all of these regular American citizens, these Minutemen, were able to kill or wound 250 British soldiers. 50 patriots were killed and 40 of them were wounded. But what this battle showed was that the Americans were not going to give up easily, that they were willing to fight for their country.